She laughed when she said it, loud enough that the fork stopped, and every head turned toward me. "Don't worry, Evelyn just does basic accounting, nothing too complicated." And then she added, with that tight little smile, "We try not to bore her with real conversations." And just like that, the entire table leaned into the joke as if it had always been true, as if I had always been small, as if the last 10 years of my life could be reduced to something polite and dismissible between a glass of wine and a passing comment. And I remember the way my husband didn't correct her, didn't even look at me, just took a sip and let it land, like it was easier that way, like I was easier that way. If you've ever sat through a moment like that, where the people who are supposed to know you best decide who you are in front of everyone else, then go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now, but only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 42 years old, and this was the night my husband's family finally realized they had been underestimating the wrong person. It started hours before that dinner, long before Amanda's voice cut across the table, back when I was still sitting in my car outside their house, engine idling, watching the porch light flicker against the siding like it always did. Nothing about the place had changed, not the narrow driveway, not the neatly trimmed hedges, not even the sense that walking through that front door meant stepping into a version of myself they had already decided on years ago, the quiet one, the agreeable one, the one with the safe job and the forgettable presence. And I let that version exist because it was useful, because sometimes the most dangerous position isn't the one everyone fears, it's the one no one notices. When I finally stepped inside, the air smelled like roasted chicken and expensive candles, the kind Amanda always lit when she wanted everything to feel curated, intentional, perfect. She greeted me with a quick glance, not unkind, just measured, like she was already calculating where I fit into the evening, and then she turned back to the others without waiting for a response. Conversations overlapped, laughter echoed, and I slipped into my seat at the far end of the table, the one that wasn't assigned but somehow always mine, somewhere that didn't quite matter. And as plates were passed and wine was poured, I watched the rhythm of the room, the way attention shifted, the way certain voices carried more weight than others, the way mine didn't carry at all, and I didn't interrupt, I didn't correct, I didn't offer anything they could dismiss, because I knew something they didn't, something that had nothing to do with numbers on spreadsheets or the version of me they had reduced to a harmless label, something already set in motion hours ago, something that didn't need my defense, didn't need my explanation. Only time, and time, I had learned, is the one thing you never rush when the truth is about to introduce itself. The laughter did not fade right away. It stretched, softened, turned into smaller conversations that carried the same quiet assumption that I was exactly who Amanda had just described and nothing more, and I let it settle, let it breathe, because correcting them would have been too easy, and easy never teaches anyone anything. Someone across the table asked me if I worked with small businesses or if I just handled personal budgets, the kind of question that sounds polite but lands like a boundary, and I nodded slightly, keeping my tone even when I answered. Something like that, because specifics would have required interest, and interest was not something I had ever been offered in this room. My husband, Daniel, shifted in his seat beside me, not uncomfortable enough to intervene, just enough to show he had heard it, and that was always the way with him, present but never quite involved when it came to me, as if defending me would somehow complicate the version of peace he preferred to maintain. Amanda leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine slowly, watching me with that same composed expression, the kind that pretends curiosity, but is built entirely on conclusion. And then she added, almost casually, "You know, numbers are simple when you do not have to think strategically." And a few people nodded, not because they agreed, but because it felt safe to align with the loudest voice at the table. I picked up my glass, not to drink, but to give my hands something steady to do, and in the reflection of the crystal I caught a glimpse of myself, calm, composed, exactly as they saw me, and completely different from what I actually was. My phone rested face down beside my plate, silent for now, but I was aware of it in the same way you are aware of a clock in a quiet room, not looking at it, but feeling its presence, measuring something unseen. Dinner moved forward, plates passed, conversations overlapping, stories about promotions, investments, vacations planned months in advance, and I listened the way I always did, absorbing everything without offering anything that could be reduced or reshaped, because every word in a room like this becomes a tool for someone else's narrative, and I had no intention of giving them more material. At one point, Amanda turned to me again, her tone lighter this time, almost playful, and asked, "So tell us, Evelyn, what is the most exciting thing you have done lately?" And there it was, the invitation that was not really an invitation, the setup that always ended the same way, with a response that would be measured against expectations I had never agreed to. And for a brief moment, I considered answering honestly, considered telling them about the months of work, the files, the patterns that only make sense when you know where to look, the kind of responsibility that does not come with applause, only consequences. But instead I set my glass down gently and said, "It has been a quiet few months." And Amanda smiled as if that confirmed everything she believed. Across the table, someone laughed again, softer this time, and Daniel finally looked at me, just for a second, as if searching for something in my expression, but there was nothing there for him to find, because I had learned a long time ago that reactions are a kind of currency, and I was no longer spending mine where it would not be valued. The clock on the wall ticked forward, subtle but steady, and I did not need to look to know the time. I had already memorized it, already calculated the margin, and somewhere beneath the surface of polite conversation and carefully curated impressions, something else was moving into place, something that did not care about opinions or assumptions, something that would not ask for permission to be acknowledged. And as Amanda began another story, her voice carrying easily across the table, I felt the faint vibration of my phone against the wood, brief, precise, and exactly on schedule. I did not reach for the phone right away. I let it vibrate once against the table and then go still, because urgency is something people can sense, and I had no intention of giving anyone a reason to look at me differently before the right moment. So I kept my posture relaxed, my expression neutral, and waited just long enough for Amanda to continue speaking, her voice filling the space again as if nothing had interrupted it, as if nothing ever could. When I finally turned the phone over, I did it slowly, shielding the screen just enough that no one else could see, and there it was, a single message, clean and direct, exactly the way I expected it to be. "We are in position, no extra words, no unnecessary detail, just confirmation." And for a second, I let my thumb rest against the edge of the device without unlocking it, feeling the weight of timing settle into place. Across from me, Amanda was describing a recent investment opportunity, something about expanding into new markets, her tone confident, practiced, the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question your own authority, and people were listening, nodding, engaging, giving her exactly what she expected: attention, validation, agreement, and I watched it all with a quiet clarity, because I had seen this pattern before, not just in rooms like this, but in reports, in case files, in the way people reveal themselves when they believe no one important is paying attention. Daniel leaned slightly closer to me then, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "You okay?" he asked, not really looking for an answer, more a reflex than concern, and I gave him a small nod, the kind that closes a question without opening a conversation, because explaining anything right now would have required context he did not have, and soon would not be able to ignore. The clock on the wall ticked again, steady, consistent, marking a moment none of them were aware of, and I could feel the shift coming, not dramatic, not loud, just inevitable, like a door about to open in a room that thought it was sealed. Amanda's gaze drifted back to me, lingering a second longer this time, as if she was trying to read something beneath the surface, and she smiled again, that same composed expression, and said, "You are very quiet tonight, Evelyn." And I met her eyes without hesitation, without tension, and replied, "I usually am," which earned a soft chuckle from someone down the table, the kind that reinforces the narrative already in place. But silence, I had learned, is not absence. It is control. It is space. It is the ability to choose exactly when something begins and when it ends, and right now, everything was exactly where it needed to be. My phone vibrated again, shorter this time, a follow-up that did not need to be read to be understood, and I set it back down beside my plate, face down once more, untouched, as if it carried nothing of importance, because the truth is, the most powerful moments rarely announce themselves with noise. They arrive quietly, settle in, and wait for the right second to be seen. Amanda raised her glass then, suggesting a toast, something light, something effortless, and everyone followed, glasses lifting, voices overlapping, and as I reached for mine, I caught the faint sound of movement near the front of the house, subtle, almost indistinguishable from the normal sounds of a home at night, a shift in air, a door opening somewhere beyond the dining room, and no one reacted, no one paused, because why would they? Nothing in their world suggested that anything was about to change. Nothing in their assumptions allowed for that possibility. And that was the moment I had been waiting for. The exact point where everything still looked the same, but was no longer what it seemed. The sound came again, clearer this time. The subtle click of the front door opening, followed by the faint shift of footsteps crossing the hardwood floor, steady, measured, not hesitant, and still no one at the table reacted, because Amanda was mid-sentence, finishing her toast about success and family, and how important it was to know your place within both, and a few people smiled at that, raising their glasses a little higher, as if the words carried more weight than they actually did. I did not turn toward the sound immediately. I let it exist at the edge of the room, just another background detail to everyone else, while I kept my eyes on the table, on the reflections in the glassware, on the small movements that reveal more than words ever do, the tightening of fingers around a fork, the slight pause before someone laughs, the way Daniel shifted again beside me, unaware of what was about to unfold but sensing, perhaps, that something had already begun. Then the footsteps reached the hallway just outside the dining room, and this time Amanda noticed, her voice trailing off for a fraction of a second before she recovered, glancing toward the doorway with mild irritation, as if an interruption at this moment was not just inconvenient but inappropriate. "Did someone forget to lock the door?" she said lightly, though there was a sharpness beneath it, the kind that surfaces when control slips even slightly. No one answered her, because in the next second, the first figure appeared at the edge of the dining room entrance, a man in a dark suit, posture straight, expression neutral, followed by another, and then a third, their presence quiet but unmistakable, not loud, not forceful, just certain, like they belonged wherever they decided to stand. The room did not freeze all at once. It slowed, conversations cutting off in uneven fragments, glasses hovering mid-air, attention shifting in a way that no one could fully control, because something unfamiliar had entered a space that was built entirely on familiarity. Amanda lowered her glass, confusion flickering across her face for the first time that evening. "Can we help you?" she asked, her tone still polished, still composed, but no longer effortless, and the man at the front did not answer her. Not immediately, his gaze moving across the table, scanning faces with quiet precision, not searching, just confirming. I felt Daniel turn toward me then, a subtle movement, a question forming that he had not yet asked, and I remained exactly as I was, seated, composed, my hands resting lightly on the table, because the moment had not fully arrived yet. It was still unfolding, still aligning. The man's eyes reached me last, not by accident, but by design, and when they did, there was a brief shift, almost imperceptible to anyone else, a recognition that did not need explanation, and he gave a small, professional nod, the kind reserved for someone who does not need to be introduced. Amanda noticed that, of course she did, her gaze snapping between him and me, trying to connect something that did not fit into the version of reality she had built. "Is this about the neighborhood or something?" she said quickly, the words coming faster now, filling the space before it could turn against her. But no one responded to her, not the agents, not the people at the table, because the center of the room had already shifted, and it was no longer where she was standing. The man stepped forward then, just one step, enough to enter the dining room fully, and in a calm, steady voice that carried without needing volume, he said, "Ma'am," and he was not looking at Amanda, not at Daniel, not at anyone else. He was looking directly at me, and in that single word, everything that had been assumed about me began to unravel, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. The word hung in the air longer than it should have, simple, controlled, but heavy enough to shift the entire room, and for the first time that night, no one moved, no one spoke, because the direction of that single word was unmistakable, and it was not aimed at the person who had been holding the room just moments ago. I did not rush to respond. I did not look surprised. I simply lifted my gaze to meet his, calm, steady, as if this was exactly where I was supposed to be, because it was. Amanda let out a small, uncertain laugh, the kind people use when something does not make sense yet, but they are not ready to admit it. "I think you might be mistaken," she said, her voice tighter now, less polished, and I could feel Daniel's attention shift fully toward me, not peripheral anymore, not casual, but focused, searching for something he had never needed to look for before. The man did not acknowledge Amanda's comment, not even a glance. His attention remained on me, and with the same measured tone, he continued, "We are ready to proceed when you are." And there it was. Not an introduction, not an explanation, just confirmation, the kind that does not ask for permission. I placed my napkin down beside my plate with deliberate care, the soft movement almost louder than any words in that moment, and as I pushed my chair back and stood, the sound of the legs against the floor seemed to echo through the silence that had settled over the table. No one stopped me, no one questioned me, because confusion had replaced certainty, and confusion does not act, it waits. Amanda's eyes followed me as I stood, wide now, trying to reconcile the woman she had just dismissed with the one now being addressed, and I could see the exact moment where the two versions stopped aligning, where her narrative no longer held. Daniel stood halfway, then hesitated, caught between instinct and uncertainty. "Evelyn, what is going on?" he asked, his voice low but no longer controlled, and I turned slightly toward him, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the question without answering it, because answers, like everything else tonight, were not mine to give yet. Instead, I reached for my bag, the same one that had been sitting quietly beside my chair all evening, unnoticed, unimportant, and opened it with steady hands, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, and from it I took out the badge, letting it catch the light for a second before holding it at my side, not raised, not presented, just visible. The effect was immediate, not explosive, but absolute, like a line being drawn where none of them had realized one existed. Amanda's expression shifted again, the last trace of composure slipping as her eyes fixed on the badge, on the detail she could not dismiss, and she did not speak this time because there was nothing left that fit the situation she had created. The man in the suit gave a slight nod, acknowledging the gesture, then turned his attention briefly to the rest of the table, his voice still calm, still even, but now carrying a quiet authority that did not need reinforcement. "We will need everyone to remain seated for the moment," he said, not as a demand, but as a statement of fact, and no one argued, no one objected, because the room had already shifted beyond that. I stepped forward then, closing the small distance between myself and the doorway, not leaving the room, not escaping it, but repositioning within it, and for the first time that night, I allowed my voice to enter the space, not raised, not sharp, just clear. "It will not take long," I said, and even to my own ears, it sounded exactly the way it was meant to, controlled, measured, final. Behind me, I could feel the weight of their attention, heavier now than their earlier dismissal had ever been, and I did not need to look back to know that the same people who had laughed only minutes ago were now sitting in complete silence, not because they were told to, but because they no longer knew what to say. The house felt different after that night, not louder, not quieter, just clearer, like something invisible had finally been named and could no longer hide behind polite smiles and practiced conversations. And in the weeks that followed, everything shifted in ways that did not need announcements or explanations. Amanda stopped calling as often, not out of anger, but distance, the kind that forms when someone realizes they never really knew the person they were speaking to. Daniel became quieter too, more observant, as if he was seeing me for the first time without the filter he had always relied on. And for me, life did not suddenly become perfect. It did not turn into something dramatic or ideal, but it became honest, and there is a kind of peace in that honesty that I had not allowed myself to feel before. I still do my work the same way, quietly, carefully, without needing recognition. But now I no longer shrink to fit into rooms that have already decided who I am. I no longer explain myself to people who are not truly listening. And most importantly, I no longer confuse silence with weakness, because silence, when chosen, is strength, it is clarity, it is knowing exactly when to speak and when to let the truth arrive on its own. What I learned from that night is simple, but it took me years to understand. People will define you based on what they can see, what they can measure, what makes them comfortable. And if you let them, they will build a version of you that fits neatly into their world. But that version is never the truth. And the moment you start believing it, you lose something far more important than their approval. You lose yourself. There is also something else, something I did not expect to learn, and that is the importance of boundaries. Not loud ones, not dramatic ones, but quiet, consistent boundaries that protect your time, your energy, your identity. You do not have to prove your worth to anyone who has already decided not to see it. You do not have to argue your value into existence, and you certainly do not have to stay in spaces that require you to become smaller just to be accepted. If you are listening to this and you recognize that feeling, that moment where you sit in a room and realize you are being seen but not understood, I want you to know that you are not alone, and more importantly, you are not what they say you are. Your value is not determined by their comfort, their expectations, or their limited perspective. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back, stay quiet, and let life reveal who you truly are in its own time. Trust that instinct, that quiet voice inside you that tells you when something is off, when something is not right, because that voice is there for a reason, whether you call it intuition, faith, or something greater. It is guiding you toward a version of yourself that does not need permission to exist. Thank you for staying with me through this story, truly, because stories like this are not just about what happened. They are about what we carry forward. And if even a small part of this made you feel seen, or understood, or a little less alone, then it mattered more than you know. And if you feel it in your heart, you can share where you are watching from, or pass this along to someone who might need it. And stay connected for more stories like this. Only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 42 years old, and the lesson I want to leave you with is this: never let anyone else define your worth when you already know who you are.